The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the dense forest that surrounded the Andersons' new home. As their SUV navigated the winding road, its headlights cutting through the encroaching twilight, the family caught their first glimpse of Green Hollow Mansion. The towering structure stood like a sentinel among the trees, its dark windows gazing out like vacant eyes. Mark Anderson gripped the steering wheel tightly, glancing at his wife, Rachel, who sat in the passenger seat with a map spread across her lap. Their children, Michael and Emma, were in the back, faces pressed against the windows, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "There it is, kids," Mark announced, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "Our new home." Emma, the youngest, with her wide eyes and unruly curls, let out a small gasp. "It looks like a castle, Daddy. A real-life haunted castle." Rachel chuckled softly, though a hint of unease tinged her laughter. "It's certainly big enough," she said, folding the map. "But it's not haunted, sweetie. Just a little old and in need of some love." The SUV rolled to a stop in front of the mansion's grand entrance. The once stately home, with its peeling paint and ivy-covered walls, seemed to sigh under the weight of its own history. The family stepped out, stretching their legs after the long drive. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. "Let's get unpacked," Mark said, clapping his hands together. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us." As they began to unload the car, a sense of foreboding settled over them. The house loomed above, silent and watchful. Emma wandered off to explore, her footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. She stopped at the edge of the woods, peering into the shadows. "Emma, stay close," Rachel called, her voice echoing slightly in the stillness. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of rooms, each filled with the dust and echoes of the past. The grand foyer, with its sweeping staircase and ornate chandelier, hinted at the house's former glory. But it was the silence that was most striking, a heavy, almost tangible quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. Michael, the eldest at 14, was the first to break the spell. "This place is huge. I bet there's a ton of secret passages and hidden rooms." Mark ruffled his son's hair. "Maybe. Just remember to help with the unpacking before you go on any treasure hunts." As the evening wore on, the family settled into their new home. Boxes were unpacked, furniture arranged, and rooms claimed. Yet, as night fell, the mansion seemed to come alive in its own peculiar way. The creaks and groans of the old house filled the silence, a reminder that it had a life of its own, a history that was deeply ingrained in its very bones. Rachel tucked Emma into bed, the little girl's eyes heavy with sleep. "Good night, sweetheart. We'll make this place feel like home in no time." Emma nodded, her eyelids drooping. "Good night, Mommy. I like it here, even if it is a bit spooky." Rachel kissed her daughter's forehead and turned off the light, leaving the room in darkness. As she closed the door, a faint whisper seemed to drift through the air, almost imperceptible. A breath, a sigh, a murmur of something long forgotten. Downstairs, Mark was finishing up in the kitchen when the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He frowned, tapping the light switch. "Must be the old wiring," he muttered to himself, though his unease grew. The night deepened and the family slept, unaware of the watchful eyes that observed them from the corners of the mansion. The spirits of Green Hollow stirred, their restless presence awakening with the arrival of the new inhabitants. In the quiet darkness, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. The Andersons had moved into the mansion in the woods, but the true nature of their new home had yet to reveal itself. and as the clock struck midnight, the house seemed to exhale, ready to share its secrets and its sorrows with those who dared to dwell within its walls. The first night in Green Hollow Mansion was unnervingly quiet. The thick forest surrounding the property seemed to absorb all sound, creating an unnatural stillness. The Anderson family, exhausted from the day's move, quickly drifted into sleep, unaware of the subtle changes occurring within their new home. Rachel woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained to listen, but the silence was oppressive. She glanced at the digital clock on her nightstand, 3:13 a.m. Beside her, Mark slept soundly, undisturbed by whatever had woken her. She got up slowly, careful not to wake him, and padded to the window. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie patterns on the lawn below. Everything seemed normal, yet Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She took a deep breath and returned to bed, forcing herself to dismiss her unease. In the room next door, Emma stirred in her sleep. She rolled over, her small hand brushing against something cold. Her eyes fluttered open and she saw a faint, shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned closer, and a soft whisper filled her ears. "Help us." Emma blinked, and the figure was gone. She sat up, breathing heavily, her heart racing. She reached for her bedside lamp and flicked it on, flooding the room with light. There was nothing there. She hugged her stuffed bunny tightly, trying to convince herself it was just a bad dream. The next morning, the family gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. The sun streamed through the windows, dispelling the shadows of the night. Mark was in high spirits, eager to tackle the day's tasks, while Rachel busied herself with making coffee. "Did anyone else hear strange noises last night?" Michael asked, poking at his cereal. Rachel paused, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. "I thought I heard something, but it was probably just the house settling. Old places like this can be pretty noisy." Emma looked up from her toast, her eyes wide. "I saw a ghost," she whispered. Mark chuckled, ruffling her hair. "You've got quite the imagination, Em. I'm sure it was just a shadow." Emma shook her head vehemently. "No, it was real. It said, 'Help us.'" Rachel and Mark exchanged uneasy glances. "Maybe you just had a bad dream, sweetheart," Rachel suggested gently. "It's a big change moving here. It's normal to feel a bit scared." Emma didn't argue, but she knew what she had seen. The ghostly figure had felt too real to be a mere figment of her imagination. She decided to keep quiet for now, hoping the apparition wouldn't return. As the day wore on, the Andersons busied themselves with unpacking and settling in. The mansion's eerie atmosphere seemed less daunting in the daylight, and the family began to explore their new home with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Michael discovered an old library filled with dusty tomes and antique furniture. He spent hours poring over the books, fascinated by their age and content. Emma found solace in the sprawling gardens, where she played among the overgrown hedges and wildflowers. But as evening approached, the mansion's unsettling presence returned. The air grew colder, and shadows lengthened unnaturally. The family gathered in the living room, seeking comfort in each other's company. "Do you hear that?" Rachel asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. They fell silent, straining to listen. Faint whispers seemed to drift through the room, unintelligible but undeniably present. Mark stood up, his face set with determination. "I'm sure it's just the wind," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'll check it out." He walked through the dimly lit halls, the whispers growing louder with each step. They seemed to come from all around him, echoing off the walls. He reached the grand foyer and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. There, at the bottom of the staircase, stood the same shadowy figure Emma had seen. It was clearer now, a translucent form of a woman in a tattered dress. Her eyes were hollow, and her mouth moved soundlessly, though Mark could hear her words as if she were standing right beside him. "Help us!" Mark stumbled back, his heart pounding. The figure vanished, leaving him alone in the dark foyer. He hurried back to the living room, his face pale. "There's something in this house," he said, his voice trembling. "Something that needs our help." The family huddled together, fear and uncertainty gripping their hearts. The whispers continued to swirl around them, a constant reminder that they were not alone in Green Hollow Mansion. The spirits of the past had awakened, and they would not rest until their story was told. The Andersons' unease had deepened overnight. Though Mark tried to reassure his family, the sight of the ghostly figure had shaken him. Determined to find answers, they decided to explore the mansion more thoroughly. After breakfast, the family split up to investigate different parts of the house. Mark and Rachel focused on the ground floor, while Michael and Emma ventured into the attic, a dusty space filled with forgotten relics of the past. The attic was a labyrinth of old furniture, trunks, and cobwebs. Sunlight filtered through small, grimy windows, casting an eerie glow over the room. Michael and Emma navigated the clutter, searching for anything that might shed light on the mansion's history. "Look at this," Michael said, pointing to an old steamer trunk in the corner. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, but its lock was broken. Together they heaved the lid open, revealing a collection of old clothes, letters, and photographs. As they sifted through the contents, Emma's eyes fell on a small, leather-bound book at the bottom of the trunk. "Michael, look!" she exclaimed, pulling it out. The cover was worn, and the pages yellowed with age. "It's a diary," Michael said, flipping it open. The first page was dated June 15th, 1924, and the handwriting was neat and elegant. "Let's take this downstairs and show Mom and Dad." In the living room, Mark and Rachel were examining a collection of old paintings they had found in a closet. They looked up as Michael and Emma entered, holding the diary. "Look what we found in the attic," Emma said, handing it to her father. Mark took the diary and began to read aloud. The entries were written by a woman named Eleanor Whitmore, the original owner of Green Hollow Mansion. The family listened intently as Mark read about Eleanor's life, her joys, and her sorrows. June 15th, 1924. Today, we moved into Green Hollow. It's a beautiful house, though its isolation is a bit unnerving. My husband Edward is thrilled with the seclusion, believing it will inspire his writing. July 2nd, 1924. Strange things have been happening. We hear whispers at night, and I feel as though we are being watched. Edward dismisses it as my imagination, but I cannot shake the feeling that we are not alone. August 10th, 1924. The whispers have become more frequent, and Edward has started to change. He's distant, often speaking to someone who isn't there. I fear something terrible is happening to us. September 1st, 1924. I found an old book in the library today, filled with strange symbols and incantations. I fear it may have something to do with the disturbances. Edward insists on keeping it, saying it's the key to understanding the house. Mark paused, his hands trembling slightly. It seems like Eleanor and her husband were experiencing the same things we are. Rachel nodded, her face pale. We need to find that book she mentioned. It might help us understand what's happening. The family decided to search the library next. They combed through the shelves, examining each book carefully. After an hour of searching, Emma let out a small cry of triumph. "I found it!" she exclaimed, holding up a heavy leather-bound tome. The cover was embossed with strange symbols, and it radiated an unsettling energy. Mark took the book from her, his hands shaking. "This must be it. Let's see what we can find." They gathered around the dining table, poring over the book's contents. The text was written in an archaic language, filled with spells and rituals. Among the pages, they found a section about summoning and banishing spirits. "It says here that the mansion was built on ancient burial grounds," Rachel read aloud. "The spirits are trapped, seeking help to move on." "We need to perform this ritual to set them free," Mark said, pointing to a detailed set of instructions. "But it's complicated. We'll need to gather specific items and perform the ritual at midnight." Determined to free the trapped spirits and end their torment, the Andersons prepared for the ritual. They scoured the mansion and the surrounding woods, gathering the necessary items: candles, herbs, and a ceremonial dagger they found in the attic. As night fell, the family assembled in the grand foyer. The atmosphere was tense, and the whispers had returned, more insistent than ever. Mark set up the ritual space, arranging the candles in a circle and placing the herbs in a small bowl in the center. At midnight, the family stood together, holding hands. Mark began to recite the incantation from the book, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his heart. The candles flickered, and the air grew thick with anticipation. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a cold wind. As Mark spoke the final words, a blinding light filled the room. The ghostly figures of Eleanor and Edward appeared before them, their faces etched with sorrow. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her voice a soft echo. "You've set us free." With that, the spirits faded, the light dimming until only the glow of the candles remained. The mansion seemed to sigh with relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. The Andersons stood in silence, the weight of their experience settling over them. They had uncovered the mansion's tragic past and helped the spirits find peace. But as they extinguished the candles and made their way to bed, they couldn't shake the feeling that Green Hollow Mansion still held more secrets waiting to be discovered. With the spirits of Eleanor and Edward now at peace, a semblance of normalcy returned to Green Hollow Mansion. The family felt a collective sigh of relief, but an underlying unease still lingered, particularly for Mark, who had become engrossed in the house's history. He spent hours in the library, poring over old records and documents, determined to understand every facet of their new home. One morning, as the family gathered for breakfast, Michael brought up an intriguing observation. "Dad, have you noticed there's a door in the basement that's locked? I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge." Mark frowned. "I hadn't seen that. We should check it out today." After breakfast, the family descended into the basement. It was a cold, damp space, filled with the smell of mildew. Mark led the way, flashlight in hand, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. They reached the far corner of the basement, where a heavy wooden door stood, its surface marred by age and neglect. Mark tried the handle, but it was indeed locked. "We need to find the key," he said, turning to Rachel. "There might be something important behind this door." The family spent the next few hours searching the mansion for a key. They checked drawers, cabinets, and even under loose floorboards, but found nothing. Just as they were about to give up, Emma let out an excited shout from the attic. "Look what I found!" She held up an ornate, old-fashioned key, covered in dust. Mark took the key, a sense of foreboding settling over him. They returned to the basement and, with a deep breath, Mark inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a loud, grating noise, and the door creaked open. Beyond the door was a small room, its walls lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a chill ran down their spines as they stepped inside. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate chest, its surface adorned with intricate carvings. Rachel approached the chest, her curiosity piqued. "What do you think is inside?" "Only one way to find out," Mark replied, lifting the heavy lid. Inside, they found an assortment of old books, trinkets, and a large leather-bound journal. Mark picked up the journal, noting its worn cover and yellowed pages. "This looks like it belonged to someone important," he said, opening it. The first page bore a name, Jonathan Whitmore. "Eleanor's son," Rachel whispered. "We didn't know she had children." They gathered around as Mark began to read aloud from the journal. The entries detailed Jonathan's life at Green Hollow Mansion, his fascination with the occult, and his growing obsession with the spirits that haunted the house. June 12th, 1926. I found the key to understanding the spirits of Green Hollow. They are bound here, not by choice, but by a curse laid upon the land long before the mansion was built. I believe I can break the curse, but it will require great sacrifice. July 4th, 1926. The ritual is almost complete. I've gathered the necessary items and prepared the incantations. Tonight, I will attempt to free the spirits. If I fail, may God have mercy on my soul. August 1st, 1926. I've made a terrible mistake. The ritual went awry, and now the spirits are more restless than ever. They are angry, vengeful. I fear what they might do. I must find a way to undo what I've done. The final entry was dated August 5th, 1926. Jonathan's handwriting was frantic, the words barely legible. They are coming for me. I can hear them whispering in the night, their voices filled with hatred. I fear my time is running out. If anyone reads this, know that the spirits of Green Hollow will not rest until the curse is lifted. Beware the darkness that dwells within these walls. Mark closed the journal, his heart pounding. Jonathan tried to free the spirits, but he failed, and now we're caught in the aftermath. Rachel nodded, her face pale. We need to find out how to lift the curse for good this time. The family spent the next few days studying Jonathan's journal and the books they found in the hidden room. They learned about the history of the land, the curse, and the dark rituals that bound the spirits to the mansion. One evening, as they were gathered in the library, Emma spoke up. What if we use the same ritual that Jonathan tried, but do it right this time? We have more information now. Maybe we can succeed where he failed. Mark considered this, nodding slowly. It's risky, but it might be our only chance to free the spirits and lift the curse. With renewed determination, the Andersons prepared for the ritual. They gathered the necessary items following Jonathan's instructions meticulously. As midnight approached, they assembled in the grand foyer, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation and fear. The family formed a circle, holding hands. Mark began to recite the incantation, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his heart. The candles flickered, and a cold wind swept through the room, carrying with it the whispers of the past. As Mark spoke the final words, a blinding light filled the room. The ghostly figures of Eleanor, Edward, and Jonathan appeared before them, their faces etched with sorrow and hope. Thank you, Jonathan whispered, his voice a soft echo. You've done what I could not. The spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. The mansion seemed to exhale, a sense of peace settling over it. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the whispers ceased. The Andersons stood in silence, the weight of their experience settling over them. They had uncovered the mansion's tragic past and helped the spirits find peace. As they extinguished the candles and made their way to bed, they felt a sense of closure. Green Hollow Mansion was no longer a place of torment, but a home filled with history and hope for the future. Though the Andersons had lifted the curse, a lingering sense of unease still clung to Green Hollow Mansion. The spirits of Eleanor, Edward, and Jonathan were at peace, but the family couldn't shake the feeling that not everything had been resolved. Strange occurrences continued to plague their daily lives, and it wasn't long before they began to hear the phantom footsteps. It started subtly, a faint creaking of the floorboards in the dead of night, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of the house settling. At first, they dismissed it as part of the mansion's old charm, but as days turned into weeks, the footsteps grew louder and more frequent, echoing through the halls and rooms at all hours. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the dining room. Mark paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, and exchanged a worried glance with Rachel. The children fell silent, their eyes wide with fear. "Maybe it's just the house settling again," Rachel suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Mark set down his fork and stood up. "I'll go check it out," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. He walked into the hallway, the creaking floorboards beneath his feet echoing the phantom sounds that had haunted them. The hall was empty, its shadows stretching long in the dim light. Mark listened intently, but the footsteps had stopped. "Is everything okay?" Rachel called from the dining room. Mark nodded, though he felt far from reassured. "Yeah, it's fine. Probably just the wind or something." But deep down, he knew that wasn't the case. That night, the footsteps returned, louder and more insistent. They seemed to move through the house with a purpose, passing by each family member's bedroom door before retreating into the depths of the mansion. Emma huddled under her blankets, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly, while Michael lay awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Unable to sleep, Rachel got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she stood at the sink, she heard the footsteps again, this time coming from the living room. She turned, her heart pounding, and saw a faint figure moving through the shadows. It was indistinct, almost like a trick of the light, but it was there. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The figure paused, then vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. Rachel stood frozen, the glass of water forgotten in her hand. She knew she hadn't imagined it. Something was still in the house, something that had not been laid to rest. The next morning, she shared her experience with the family. "I saw someone in the living room last night. It wasn't like the other spirits we've seen. This one felt different. Angry, maybe." Mark nodded, his expression grim. "We need to figure out what's going on. There's gotta be more to this house than we realized." They decided to delve deeper into the mansion's history, searching for any clues that might explain the continued disturbances. Mark spent hours in the local library, combing through old newspapers and records. He discovered that Green Hollow Mansion had been built on land that had once been a burial ground for an old, forgotten settlement. "It looks like there were reports of hauntings here long before the mansion was built," Mark explained to the family one evening. "People claimed to hear footsteps, see figures in the woods, and experience strange occurrences." "So it's not just the Whitmores," Michael said, his voice tinged with both fear and fascination. "There's something else here, something older." Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, the family decided to conduct a thorough search of the mansion. They scoured every room, nook, and cranny, looking for anything that might help explain the ghostly footsteps. it was Emma who made the next crucial discovery. While exploring a small, dusty room in the attic, she found an old, weathered photograph tucked behind a loose floorboard. The photo showed a group of stern-faced men and women standing in front of a building that looked strikingly similar to Green Hollow Mansion, though older and more primitive. "Look what I found!" Emma exclaimed, rushing to show her parents. Mark examined the photograph, a chill running down his spine. "This must be the original settlers of the land," he said. "If they're the ones haunting the mansion, we need to find out what happened to them." Rachel nodded, her face set with determination. "We need to conduct another ritual. This time, we'll focus on the land itself and the spirits of the original settlers." That night, as the moon rose high in the sky, the Andersons gathered in the grand foyer once more. They arranged the candles and herbs, following the same steps as before, but with a new purpose. Mark began to recite the incantation, his voice steady and clear. As the ritual progressed, the footsteps grew louder, surrounding them from all sides. The air grew colder, and a sense of malevolence filled the room. The family stood firm, holding hands and chanting together, determined to see it through. A blinding light filled the room, and the ghostly figures of the original settlers appeared, their faces twisted in anger and sorrow. Mark continued the incantation, urging the spirits to find peace and leave the land. "Be at rest," he called out. "Your suffering is over. Go to the light and find peace." The settlers hesitated, their forms flickering. Slowly, their expressions softened and they began to fade. The footsteps ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. The Andersons stood in silence, the weight of their actions settling over them. They had faced the darkest parts of Green Hollow Mansion's history and emerged victorious. The footsteps were gone, and the spirits finally at peace. As they extinguished the candles and made their way to bed, they felt a sense of closure. Green Hollow Mansion was no longer a place of fear, but a home where history had been acknowledged and laid to rest. The family could finally begin to enjoy their new life, free from the shadows of the past. Peace had seemingly returned to Green Hollow Mansion, but the tranquility was short-lived. As the days turned into weeks, the Anderson family found themselves grappling with an unseen force that threatened their sanity and safety. The mansion's oppressive atmosphere, temporarily lifted, returned with a vengeance, bringing with it a new level of terror. It began with small incidents that were easy to dismiss. Rachel misplaced her keys only to find them in bizarre places, like the refrigerator or the mailbox. Mark's tools disappeared from the garage, only to reappear neatly arranged in the living room. Michael and Emma's toys moved on their own, leaving them feeling uneasy and watched. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emma's behavior took a disturbing turn. She sat silently, her eyes glazed over, and her food untouched. When Rachel asked her what was wrong, Emma simply stared ahead, unresponsive. "Emma, sweetheart, are you feeling okay?" Rachel asked, her voice filled with concern. Emma's head snapped up, her eyes dark and distant. "They're coming," she whispered in a voice that wasn't her own. "You can't stop them." The family froze, a chill running down their spines. Mark reached out to touch Emma's hand, but she pulled away, her expression blank and emotionless. "Emma, snap out of it," Mark said, his voice trembling. But Emma didn't respond. She stood up abruptly and walked out of the room, leaving her family in stunned silence. Over the next few days, Emma's strange behavior worsened. She spoke in tongues, her voice shifting between her own and that of an unfamiliar, menacing presence. At night, she wandered the halls, her footsteps echoing eerily through the mansion. The rest of the family found themselves on edge, their nerves frayed by the constant tension. One night, Michael woke to find Emma standing at the foot of his bed, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Michael, help me," she whispered, her voice a haunting mix of fear and malice. "They're inside me." Terrified, Michael called for his parents. Mark and Rachel rushed to his room, their faces pale with worry. They found Emma standing motionless, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. "Emma, sweetheart, what's happening to you?" Rachel cried, tears streaming down her face. Emma didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. The family followed her, their hearts pounding with fear. They found her in the basement, standing in front of the locked room they had previously discovered. "They're here," Emma said, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "The ones who never left." Mark stepped forward, his mind racing. "What do you mean, Emma? Who's here?" "The Dark Ones," Emma replied, her voice a hollow whisper. "The ones who cursed this land. They want me. They want us all." Rachel clutched Mark's arm, her fear palpable. "We need to do something, Mark. We can't let them take her." Desperation led the family to seek help from a paranormal expert. They contacted Dr. Elizabeth Thorne, a renowned parapsychologist with a reputation for dealing with malevolent spirits. Dr. Thorne arrived the next day, her presence bringing a glimmer of hope to the terrified family. Dr. Thorne conducted a thorough investigation of the mansion, using various tools and techniques to identify the source of the possession. She discovered that the spirits of the original settlers had not been fully appeased, their anger and resentment lingering in the very foundations of the house. "These spirits are particularly strong," Dr. Thorne explained. "They're feeding off your fear and using Emma as a conduit. We need to perform a cleansing ritual to banish them once and for all." The Andersons prepared for the ritual with Dr. Thorne's guidance. They gathered the necessary items: sage, holy water, and protective symbols. As night fell, they assembled in the grand foyer, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation and dread. Dr. Thorne began the ritual, chanting incantations and waving the sage to cleanse the space. The family stood in a circle around Emma, who remained eerily still, her eyes closed. The air grew cold, and a sense of malevolence filled the room. The spirits manifested, their ghostly forms flickering in the candlelight. They swirled around Emma, their whispers filled with anger and sorrow. "Be gone, spirits of the past," Dr. Thorne commanded. "Leave this child and this family in peace." The spirits resisted, their forms becoming more defined and menacing. Emma's body convulsed, her eyes snapping open to reveal a mixture of terror and fury. "Help me," she cried, her voice her own once more. The family held hands, their combined strength and love forming a barrier against the spirits. Dr. Thorne continued her chants, her voice growing stronger and more commanding. "By the power of light and love, I banish you from this place," she intoned. "Return to the darkness from whence you came." With a final piercing scream, the spirits dissolved into the air, their presence vanishing. Emma collapsed to the floor, unconscious but free from the malevolent force that had possessed her. The family rushed to her side, their relief palpable. Dr. Thorne finished the ritual, ensuring that the spirits would not return. "It's over," she said, her voice filled with exhaustion. "The spirits have been banished, and Emma is safe." The Andersons helped Emma to her feet, their hearts filled with gratitude. They had faced the darkest depths of Green Hollow Mansion and emerged victorious. The possession and paranoia that had plagued them were gone, replaced by a sense of peace and hope for the future. As they extinguished the candles and made their way to bed, They knew that Green Hollow Mansion was no longer a place of fear, but a home where they could finally begin to heal and move forward. The following morning, the Anderson family woke with a renewed sense of peace and determination. The events of the previous night had left them shaken, but also resolute in their mission to uncover the full history of Green Hollow Mansion. They knew that understanding the past was crucial to ensuring their future safety. Mark gathered the family in the library. We need to find out everything we can about the original settlers and the curse they placed on this land. If we can understand what happened, we might be able to prevent any further disturbances. Rachel nodded in agreement. We should start with the records we found in the attic and the journal Jonathan Whitmore left behind. The family spent hours poring over the documents, piecing together the tragic history of the land on which the mansion stood. They discovered that the original settlers had faced unimaginable hardships, failed crops, harsh winters, and mysterious illnesses that decimated their numbers. Desperation had driven them to dark rituals in a futile attempt to appease the spirits they believed were tormenting them. Emma found another hidden compartment in the attic, revealing a set of old letters. They were written by Sarah Whitmore, Jonathan's sister, and provided more insight into the family's struggles. January 15th, 1890. Dear Jonathan, the spirits grow restless. Father believes that the land is cursed, and Mother prays for salvation daily. I fear we are all doomed. The rituals have only made things worse, and I can no longer sleep for the whispers that haunt me each night. February 3rd, 1890. The darkness is consuming us. Father has taken ill, and Mother is not herself. We must find a way to lift this curse before it is too late. I hope you can uncover the secrets that elude us, for I fear I have not much time left. As Mark read the letters aloud, the family felt a deep sympathy for the Whitmores and the other settlers. They had been victims of their own fear and desperation, trapped in a cycle of darkness that had persisted for generations. Rachel looked at her children, a newfound determination in her eyes. We need to find where they perform these rituals. If we can locate the exact spot, we might be able to undo the damage and finally bring peace to this land. Michael suggested they search the wooded area surrounding the mansion. There might be some clues out there, something that points to where these rituals took place. The family donned their coats and ventured into the dense forest. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. They walked for hours, searching for any signs of the settlers' activities. Eventually, Emma spotted something unusual, a circle of stones covered in moss and leaves. "Over here!" she called, her voice filled with excitement. The family gathered around the stone circle, its presence eerie and out of place in the serene forest. Mark knelt down, brushing away the debris to reveal markings etched into the stones. They were the same symbols they had seen in Jonathan's journal and the mysterious book they had found earlier. "This must be it," Mark said, his voice heavy with realization. "This is where they performed the rituals." Rachel nodded, her expression determined. "We need to conduct our own ritual here, to cleanse this place once and for all." Using the instructions from Jonathan's journal and Dr. Thorne's guidance, the family prepared for the cleansing ritual. They gathered herbs, candles, and other necessary items, creating a protective circle around the stone altar. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, the family stood together, ready to face the darkness one last time. Mark began to recite the incantation, his voice strong and steady. The air grew cold, and a sense of foreboding filled the forest. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and ghostly figures appeared, their faces twisted in anguish. The spirits of the original settlers, still trapped by the curse they had unwittingly strengthened, surrounded the family. By the power of light and love, we cleanse this land, Mark intoned, his voice unwavering. We release you from your torment and free you from the darkness. The spirits howled, their forms flickering and shifting. Rachel, Michael, and Emma joined hands, their combined strength forming a protective barrier against the malevolent energy. Go to the light, Rachel urged, her voice filled with compassion. Find peace and rest. The spirits hesitated, their faces showing a mixture of fear and hope. Slowly, one by one, they began to fade, their anguished cries turning to whispers of gratitude. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the forest seemed to exhale, a sense of tranquility settling over the land. The family stood in silence, the weight of their actions sinking in. They had uncovered the tragic history of Green Hollow Mansion and had finally set the spirits free. The curse was broken, and the land was cleansed. As they extinguished the candles and made their way back to the mansion, the Andersons felt a profound sense of closure. They had faced the darkest parts of the past and emerged stronger, their bond as a family unbreakable. Green Hollow Mansion was no longer a place of fear and torment, but a home where they could begin to heal and build a new future. The shadows of the past had been laid to rest, and the Andersons could finally find peace. Despite the successful cleansing of the forest, the Andersons' sense of victory was short-lived. The peaceful days that followed were marred by a series of unsettling events. Objects moved on their own, unexplained cold spots appeared throughout the house, and most disturbingly, Emma's behavior began to change again. She grew increasingly withdrawn and often seemed to be in a trance. One evening, Rachel found Emma standing in front of the locked basement room, the same one that had once contained the strange artifacts in Jonathan Whitmore's journal. Emma's eyes were vacant, and she murmured incoherently, her hands pressed against the door. "Emma, honey, what are you doing?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Emma turned slowly, her expression eerily calm. "They're still here, Mommy. They never left." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that despite their efforts, they hadn't eradicated the darkness entirely. There was something more powerful, more ancient, lurking within Green Hollow Mansion. They needed to take more drastic measures to rid their home of this lingering malevolence. Mark and Rachel decided to call Dr. Elizabeth Thorne once again. When she arrived, her face was grave as she listened to their experiences. "I feared this might happen," Dr. Thorne said. "The spirits you encountered in the forest were only part of the problem. There's a deeper, darker force at work here, something that has been feeding on the fear and suffering in this house for centuries. We need to perform a more powerful exorcism, one that targets the heart of the darkness." Dr. Thorne explained that this ritual would require significant preparation and a strong collective will. They needed to gather rare herbs, special candles, and sacred relics. More importantly, the ritual would need to be performed at the witching hour, midnight, when the veil between the worlds was thinnest. The Andersons spent the next few days preparing. They traveled to nearby towns and consulted with local historians and herbalists, gathering the necessary items for the exorcism. Each night, the disturbances grew worse, as if the malevolent force sensed their intentions and was trying to thwart them. On the night of the ritual, the family and Dr. Thorne gathered in the grand foyer, where the presence felt strongest. The air was thick with tension, and an unnatural chill permeated the room. They arranged the candles in a circle and placed the sacred relics at the center. Dr. Thorne began the ritual, her voice strong and authoritative. "By the power of light and love, we call upon the forces of good to banish the darkness from this place. Let the spirits of this land find peace, and let the malevolence be cast out forever. As she chanted, the candles flickered violently, and a cold wind swept through the room. The shadows seemed to come alive, swirling and twisting, forming grotesque shapes. The family held hands, their determination unwavering despite the fear that gnawed at them. Emma, standing beside her parents, suddenly cried out in pain. She collapsed to the floor, writhing as if something unseen was trying to take control. Rachel knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "Fight it, Emma," she urged. "You're stronger than it is." Mark tightened his grip on Rachel's hand, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "Stay with us, Emma. We're here for you." Dr. Thorne intensified her chanting, her voice rising above the howling wind. "By the power of the light, I command you to leave this child in this house. Be gone, malevolent force, and return to the darkness from whence you came." The shadows seemed to resist, but slowly they began to lose their form and dissipate. Emma's convulsions lessened, and she lay still, her breathing ragged but steady. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. After what felt like an eternity, the final shadow vanished, and the room fell silent. The candles burned steadily, their light casting a warm glow over the exhausted family. Dr. Thorne knelt beside Emma, checking her pulse and examining her eyes. "She's going to be okay," she said softly. "The darkness has been banished, but she'll need time to recover." Mark and Rachel hugged their daughter tightly, relief washing over them. The family had faced the deepest, darkest part of Green Hollow Mansion's history and emerged victorious. The malevolent force that had plagued the land for centuries was finally gone. As they helped Emma to her feet and made their way upstairs, they felt a profound sense of closure. The mansion was no longer a place of fear and torment. It had become a true home, a place where they could heal and build new memories. The Andersons knew that the journey to reclaiming their peace was not over, but they were united and stronger than ever. They had faced unimaginable horrors and come out on the other side, bound by their love and determination. Green Hollow Mansion stood silent and serene, its dark past finally laid to rest. The Anderson family could now look forward to a future filled with hope and light. In the days following the exorcism, a fragile peace settled over Green Hollow Mansion. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the family began to rebuild their lives, finding solace in the tranquility that now enveloped their home. Yet beneath this calm, a sense of foreboding lingered. The Andersons couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was yet to come. Mark, ever the diligent researcher, continued to delve into the mansion's history, determined to uncover any lingering secrets. He spent hours in the library, poring over old texts and local legends. One evening, he discovered a passage in a forgotten tome that sent a chill down his spine. "The true heart of darkness lies beneath," the passage read. "In the catacombs where the cursed blood was spilled, the evil festers. Only by confronting it at its source can the curse be lifted forever." Mark gathered the family in the living room, his face grave. "There's more to this than we realized. The exorcism weakened the malevolent force, but it wasn't enough. We need to go deeper, into the catacombs beneath the mansion. That's where the true source of the curse lies." Rachel looked at him, fear and determination mingling in her eyes. "If that's what it takes to protect our family and finally put an end to this, then we have to do it." Michael and Emma, though frightened, nodded in agreement. They had come too far to turn back now. The entrance to the catacombs was hidden behind a false wall in the basement, a secret that had remained undiscovered for generations. With trepidation, The family descended into the darkness, armed with flashlights and the knowledge that this was their final confrontation. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, the narrow passageways lined with the bones of the long-dead settlers. The weight of history pressed down on them, each step echoing with the whispers of the past. At the heart of the catacombs, they found a chamber, its walls covered in ancient symbols and bloodstains. In the center stood an altar, dark and foreboding. The malevolent force they had sensed all along seemed to emanate from this very spot. Mark began to set up the ritual space, his hands steady despite the fear gnawing at his heart. Rachel, Michael, and Emma formed a protective circle around him, their faces set with determination. As Mark lit the candles and began the incantation, the air grew thick with an unseen presence. The shadows in the chamber writhed and twisted, taking on grotesque shapes. The temperature plummeted, and a deep, guttural voice echoed through the catacombs. "Leave this place," the voice commanded, filled with ancient malice. "You cannot defeat me." Rachel stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "We will not be driven out. This ends tonight." The shadows surged forward, but the family's resolve held firm. Mark continued the incantation, his voice rising above the cacophony. The malevolent force fought back, trying to extinguish the candles and plunge them into darkness. Emma, her eyes wide with fear, clung to her mother's hand. "Stay strong, Em," Rachel whispered. "We can do this." Michael, his face pale but resolute, stepped closer to the altar. "Dad, what do we need to do?" Mark's voice trembled slightly. "We need to destroy the source of the curse, the altar. It's where the settlers spilled the cursed blood." With a nod, Michael grabbed a heavy rock from the ground. "I've got this." As Michael brought the rock down on the altar, the malevolent force let out a deafening scream. The shadows recoiled, writhing in agony. Mark intensified his chants, calling upon the forces of light to banish the darkness forever. The altar cracked under Michael's repeated blows, and a blinding light filled the chamber. The shadows dissipated, their malevolent energy shattered. The guttural voice faded into a whisper, then silence. The family stood in the midst of the ruins, their breaths heavy and hearts pounding. The oppressive presence was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. The curse had been lifted, and the catacombs were finally at rest. As they made their way back to the surface, the first light of dawn broke through the darkness. Green Hollow Mansion, bathed in the soft morning glow, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. The house, once a place of fear and torment, now felt like a true home. The Andersons, united and stronger than ever, embraced on the front lawn. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged victorious. The shadows of the past had been vanquished, and the future lay bright before them. In the days that followed, the mansion's oppressive atmosphere lifted completely. The family continued to rebuild their lives, their bond unbreakable. Green Hollow Mansion, now free from its dark history, became a place of hope and new beginnings. And though the journey had been perilous, the Andersons knew that they had triumphed over the darkness. Together, they had reclaimed their home and their lives, and the haunted mansion in the woods was haunted no more.